Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round 5 coverage of my games from the 2017 Western States Open. Round 5 was played Sunday morning at 9:30. Let's see, I didn't sleep as well on Saturday night as I did on Friday night. The games were a little bit tougher. I had a little bit more to think over, I guess, in my subconscious. Anyway, I was a little bit tired, plus being a little tired from being the fifth round of a tough tournament. But I suspect my opponent was a little bit tired too, so the game is a bit uneven, you might say. But anyway, my rating for this game and for the tournament is 1765, and my opponent's rating is 1795. So the first time I've faced a higher rated opponent, and he's the player that has the perfect score. So at this point in the tournament, we're playing on board one. I have, in the B section, I have 3.5 points out of 4, and he's got 4 out of 4. And then there's one other player that also has 3.5 points out of 4, and he's playing on board 2 against some other player. So anyway, I got picked to play against the tournament leader. We're on board 1, and I have the black pieces. The other interesting thing is that my opponent is someone I played once before and lost to. And the time when I played him before, we were both A players. So I was actually a bit surprised to see him in the B section because he was an adult, but he's quite a bit younger than me. And you don't see these younger players dropping down in class so often. In fact, it often makes you suspicious that they might be sandbagging. But I looked up his record later, and actually he has... his rating has just been down for the last couple of years. At one time, his rating was up to 1980, so he's actually a pretty strong player. But a couple of years ago, his rating fell down into the Class B category. It fell as low as 1730, and then he's been working his way back up, and he's heading towards getting back into Class A, it looks like, especially given the result of this tournament. So anyway, a tough opponent, and I got the black pieces. He starts off with d4. Play knight f6. Goes c4. So I go e6. I'm going to play the Nimzo Indian if I get the chance. That's really my most solid opening. The one I'm most familiar with is black against d4. But he plays g3. And so this actually will transpose into a different opening altogether. I suppose I could still try a Bogo Indian here with bishop to b4 check, but I'm not so familiar with that. So, as usual, when I get into lines I don't know too much about, I just go back to basic principles and play d5. Let's see, he goes knight f3, and then I go b6 here. But before I put that move on the board, let's talk about this. This is actually a Catalan opening, and there's different ways to play it from this position. The open Catalan is a pretty interesting way to play it. You take the pawn here, and then white goes with bishop g2, and you can even try and hold on to the pawn with moves like c6 and b5, but white gets a lot of pressure along this open diagonal. So I think usually you give that pawn up, and white eventually rounds that pawn up. But the point is that the bishop is come to a different diagonal, so you don't get the typical bishop takes that you get in many other lines of, for example, the Queen's Gambit accepted. So anyway, this is called the open Catalan, a pretty interesting way to play, tactical, and I wouldn't play this without having some knowledge of it, particularly as black. But certainly it's a playable way to approach the opening. And then there's the closed Catalan, where you just decline to take the pawn. Oh, there's a couple ways to play it. One is to just go bishop e7 and castle. And the top move here is taking, but I think you're taking at this point, not with the idea of holding on to the pawn, but just the idea of opening up the center a little bit and developing your pieces. And there's one other line that you can think about in this position, which is to throw in this bishop b4 check. I just like these little opening tricks. The idea is that, well, the king can't move, he's got to block. If he blocks with the knight or the bishop, bishop blocking is the main move here. If the knight blocks, then it's just pinned there for a while, and white will waste some time. And then black actually doesn't want to trade that bishop. He drops it back. That's what I like about this opening sequence. And apparently the idea is that bishop is in the way of the queen defending the center, so maybe it's not the most appropriate post for the bishop. And then the line continues. So there's another flavor of closed Catalan, I guess. Anyway, I didn't know any of that really. Well, I knew that taking was the open Catalan and not taking was the closed Catalan, but I didn't know too much beyond that. So I played the move b6. And this is a very rare move here, but, well, at least according to the chess engine, it's not too bad. So I guess I'd be willing to repeat this line. There's just one point that comes up later that where black has to be careful. It's sometimes interesting to continue to play these offbeat lines if it turns out that they're playable. It gets your opponent out of his book, and it saves you the trouble of learning yet another opening. So he went ahead and took here. I think that's a reasonable choice here, and one of the top engine choices. I take back. He went bishop g2. And actually, after taking, we're out of the opening book. So these moves are not in the opening book. But we just do some normal... Oh, no, I didn't go there. Sorry. I went bishop to e7. We just do some normal developing moves here. And after a few moves, let's see, he goes knight c3. I castled, and he castled. And at this point, we're actually back in the opening book. So we've just transposed into another line of the closed Catalan where I just played this move b6 rather early. And you can see that I never did get in that bishop b7 move up until this point, and that is the move here. So this seems to be a playable position. The top choice here for white is rook e1. But he played the interesting move knight e5. And so this is the one point of the one caveat I have about playing this opening, which is you have to remember in this position that knight b to d7 is not a particularly good move, and that the move you need to play is knight to a6. Pretty subtle point, and I just played the move knight b d7, so I played this, and there is a move that white has here which is pretty good that could really punish this knight b d7 move. So if you want to think about it a little bit, what would you play as white here to try and take advantage of this particular move order and this setup that I've got here? Okay, I'll give the answer away now. The clever move here is queen to a4. He didn't play this, but this is a reason not to play knight b d7. The queen and the knight are looking at this c6 square, and so he can sort of force a trade of that bishop, or other things can go on. Let's see. Let's give a couple examples. If I just do nothing, let's do that one first. If I just do nothing, then he's just going to drop the knight into c6, and that's an annoying piece that I probably want to get rid of. If I move my queen, I guess I lose one bishop or the other, I guess, in this case, no matter what I do. If I move the queen, he can take this bishop. And if I don't move the queen, I have to take the knight, so I'll lose my light-squared bishop. So this is just good for, it's just good for white. Let's see, if I try to do something, if I take it off, that would be my other choice. Knight takes, then let's see, it pushes this knight away and leaves this pawn under defended. I guess knight to e4 is a way to try to hold on to everything, but he can take and then take with the bishop. So he's grabbed a pawn. I mean, it's not a huge advantage for white. It's not like he's a full pawn up, because his extra pawn is this doubled e pawn. So probably still playable for black, but it's a pretty big advantage for white, really. I would definitely avoid this. So anyway, let's back up to the game here. So let's look at why knight a6 is the right move. If you play knight a6, and then he tries something like queen to a4 with the similar idea, you can actually push this pawn forward with c5, and this seems to work out pretty well. In the other line with the knight on d7, you can't play the c5 move. He trades off the knight, and after you take back, the d pawn is hanging. So it just doesn't work. But here you can play c5, and this seems to be okay. I mean, he can still force this trade, but at least in this case, you get some compensation. You have more pawns in the center, and you have this knight b5 move to kick the queen around. And after knight b5, the queen retreats, you can even grab a pawn and go a pawn up temporarily. So knight a6, kind of a surprising move, but it does, like the knight on d7, it's also looking at this c5 square, helping to support this pawn to c5 idea. And as we saw, knight to b5 can be an idea in some cases as well. So if you just remember this knight e6 idea, then I think you can play this opening line just fine. But in the game, I played the move knight b to d7. And he didn't go with this queen a4 idea, but instead he played the pretty logical move bishop to f4. And now we really are out of the opening book for good. Let's see, I continued with c5. That's been one of the objects of my play in this game so far. I've got the bishop and the knight ganging up on that pawn, or supporting that pawn, and also I want to get my rook to the c file. So I think this is a reasonable position. He takes. And one thing is that, you have to be willing to play these isolated queen's pawn positions because, well, taking back with the pawn leaves this d pawn underdefended. It's attacked 3 times and only defended twice at the moment. So taking with the knight was the plan here. And now I've got my d pawn defended, and I think this is okay. I've got an isolated queen's pawn, but I've got good development here, and I've placed my bishop here to counteract his active Catalan bishop, and I've got ideas of pushing this pawn forward. So he played the move bishop to c1 here, a little bit surprising. I'm trying to remember. I guess if he plays a move like e3, it just keeps that bishop blocked in, and I can think about harassing that bishop. So that's not so attractive. And maybe he's a little bit worried about me pushing this pawn forward and taking squares away from his bishop, hitting his knight. So not so many good squares for this bishop. And also, I'm going to, if I get a chance, I am going to play this move knight to h5 to harass that bishop. I was realizing, though, that after e3, his queen is covering h5, so I can't play that immediately. But still, it looks a little bit funny to lock in his bishop. The chess engine likes the move rook to c1 here, not worrying too much about the bishop. I would probably play this way, knight to e6. That's another way to harass this bishop. And then knight to d3, just defending the bishop and allowing black to win the bishop pair. And that's supposedly best play for both sides. So if that's best play, then you could say that, black has the weakness of the isolated queen's pawn, but black gains the advantage of the bishop pair, and overall it seems to be about equal. Anyway, he went bishop back to c1, just preserving the bishop pair, getting it out of trouble, but leading to a position where he's just less active. And I think I have an advantage from this point, or starting at this point, I mean. So knight f to e4 is what I played. I think that's good square for the knight, and if he trades it off, which he did, I'm planning to take back with the pawn. And so I've cured my my weakness. I don't have an isolated queen's pawn. And moreover, I have the idea of f5 shutting in this bishop. So I'm feeling pretty good about the game here. I don't mind if he wants to trade queens. He avoids the queen trade by playing bishop to d2. I go bishop to f6, harassing his knight here. He goes bishop to c3, defending it. Maybe not the most accurate play, but still seems to be okay. But yeah, he gets a bad pawn structure out of this, so probably there were some improvements for white along here. This is a long game, so I'm not going to give an option at every point in the game where we did something wrong. Also, as I said before, this is a game where we were both a little bit tired, I think, and so there's too many mistakes in this game to really point out a correction for everyone. Let's see. But in general, I'm keeping some edge through this part of the game. Let's see. I go rook e8. He drops his knight back to c4, and that's why this was not the most accurate move. I kind of force his knight to move anyway, and then with the bishop there, I can trade it off, and I create another pawn weakness. So I'm feeling, like I said, pretty good about my position here. And now here's a inaccuracy that I did want to point out in some detail. I actually have the advantage to go up, the possibility to go up material right here, and I missed it. So if you want to look at this position and think about what the best move is right here, maybe you can spot the idea. Okay, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. I'm giving the answer away now. I went queen to e7, and that is not not the right answer. It's a good logical move. I decided to avoid the queen trade and just play with my, I'm just trying to play against his inactive bishop, and I want to bring a rook over and harass his queen. And, I'm feeling good about the position anyway. But there was a way to win material here with bishop to a6, targeting this undefended knight. And after the knight drops back, then I can trade queens and then grab this pawn. So that would I would just be up a pawn here, and that would certainly be a better way to play it. Let's see, instead of knight e3, after I play bishop a6, he could also try knight to d6. I think this was an engine line. Gets pretty tricky. Rook to e6, kicking the knight. The knight can hop over here to f5, but I can still trade queens at this point and grab the pawn. So it still leads to a good position for black. So queen to e7, I keep a slight edge. I think I'm still in that portion of the game where I'm keeping an advantage. But I just could have grabbed a pawn there, or won a pawn. Let's see, he went queen c2 at this point. He could obviously see a rook coming to the d file and got out of the way in advance. I went queen e6, eyeing his loose knight there. Pushed his knight back to e3. And I went rook a to c8. Since the queen has already moved off the d file, I thought, well, maybe I will try and get some play against this pawn here. So now we get into a position of the game where I guess you would characterize this as a maneuvering portion. And I won't comment too much on these moves. We're just trying different things. Let's see, he goes here. I went bishop to c6. I guess I was trying to get the bishop maybe out to this b4 square. He goes h4. And he has a tactical idea with this h4 move, which you can think about it if you want to. I saw it coming, so I wasn't too worried about it at this point. Let's see, I went bishop to b5, continuing with my plan. He went king to h2, and now I have to do something about his tactical idea, which, in case you hadn't spotted it just yet, you might want to pause the video, because there is your danger sign should be flashing at this point. Okay, I'm giving the answer away now. What he's threatening is putting a bishop on that diagonal and skewering my queen and rook. Always watch out for those little alignments of your pieces. So, move the rook over here to g6. Let's see, he went queen b2, hitting my bishop, and I just went back to c6. So, I guess I was trying to build up some pressure on this pawn, and then I eventually gave up on that idea and put the bishop back where it came. That's what I mean, we're in the kind of maneuvering phase. He went rook f to d1. Let's see, I went rook c to d8. I decided to just oppose rooks on the d file. This queen's no longer on the c file, so the rook wasn't doing a whole lot there anyway. And I don't want to give control of the d file to white. Let's see, he went bishop h3 anyway. I mean, that controls the ch square, so it's probably a good spot. And now I had the idea maybe of targeting the f-pawn with queen to f6. But I saw that he could play his knight here, so I threw in the move h5. Stops his pawns from coming forward and takes control of that g4 square, so I can pressure the f2 pawn with my queen. He just moves his king back. His king moved to h2 to get his bishop to a good square, I guess, and now it's just going back to defend the f-pawn. I went queen f6 anyway. I mean, I'm not only looking at the f-pawn, I was also looking at the c-pawn. I was just trying to figure out ways, as I was doing these maneuvers, I was trying to figure out ways to, to set up double attacks and exploit his weaknesses or create more weaknesses. So that's what this part of the game has been about. Now we're getting up to move 27, and this move is an outright mistake. He played knight to f5. And I think Well, we've both been taking our time, and you know, this has been a kind of a difficult phase. These maneuvering phases of the games where you're looking for things to do to improve your position and trying not to mess up can sometimes be the most difficult and time consuming. It's kind of easier if you have some clear tactical sequence that you're pursuing. So we've both been burning a lot of time on the clock, but this move is a definite mistake. And if you want to, why don't you see if you can find the best move for black here? Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now, so you can pause the video if you want time to think about it. The answer is bishop to d7. Yeah, why not just pin that knight? His bishop, you know, his king is moved away, so his bishop is loose on h3. And he doesn't really have time to defend the bishop, because if he defends the bishop, I'm just going to take the knight. And he can't easily defend the knight. Let's see, can he play? He could have brought his rook up. Maybe that's a playable move. The chess engine says, actually, that the best move for white here is to give up the exchange by taking. So there must be some problem with that move as well. Maybe bishop to, yeah, I guess after the rook comes to d5, I could play bishop to e6. I guess that would chase the rook away and still keep pressure on his knight. So anyway, he's just losing the exchange in this position. I don't know why he played this move, and I don't know why I didn't play bishop d7. You know, it's possible that that both of us thought there was some kind of tactic here. One possible tactical idea would be moving the knight with check and double attacking this bishop. It suddenly brings two pieces to bear on that bishop. But the bishop is defended by two pieces, so that tactic has no basis. So if that was the idea here, then it was just some kind of miscalculation. Something was missed in this position. And the funny thing is, we both missed it, because he played knight f4, and I didn't play bishop d7. I spotted another tactical idea, and I went for that one. So I'm not sure if I thought about that bishop d7 move at all, or if I just saw this tactical idea and just went for it. But well, if you want another little quiz, you can maybe try and figure out what idea I spotted in this position. Okay, anyway, I'm going to give the answer away now. I played the move rook takes d1. That comes with check, so that's a tempo move. He takes back. And then I played the move knight a4. And this was my idea. I'm just forking the queen and the pawn. And I actually spent a long time thinking about this, because there's a bunch of different ways that, you know, I mean, obviously he needs to move the queen, but the queen has a number of squares it could go to. And, you know, it's not obvious that all of them, I mean, I had to be sure that there was no queen move that hit one of my loose pieces. But my pieces are all defended at the moment. But there is one good queen move here. There's that kind of leads to an equal position. So this is one of those places where white could have equalized with the correct move. So let's see if you want to. I don't know if you want this as an exercise or not. I will say it's pretty difficult to figure out. He played the move queen c2, and things just went as I planned. He took. I actually played rook c1 first, but we ended up with a trade of queens, and I'm just a pawn up. But there's a very interesting move here. After I take, he takes, and I play knight a4. He could play queen a3. And now, you know, I really want to take with the queen. But in this position, he has a way to force a draw, and that's what I missed. He can play knight e7 check. And, well, I could go down the exchange by taking the knight, or I could move the king. But if I move the king, then his knight can actually come back here, and it's a double check. So so I'm not doing well here. Well, I just have to go back. So that is a draw. Let's see, knight e7 check, king f8. King h8 is the same thing. Maybe I could have tried king king h7. Ah, but he's got this bishop check then. Yeah, so there's no way of avoiding the draw, which is what the chess engine said. And then taking the pawn with the knight, I had already ruled this out because he has this move with the rook. Defended by the knight, the rook can come in and attack my queen and this bishop, which is suddenly loose. Well, it's a fork, so the rook is in the way of the defense of the bishop by the queen. So that doesn't work either. So this queen a3 move was a great resource that he could have used to basically equalize the game. Instead, he went to queen c2. And that was the only way. So in this line, I come out a pawn up, which I do in every line except for that queen a3 line. Let's see. He went rook c1. I took. He took. Went knight c5. And so this is all looking good for me. I had to... this is an important maneuver, getting the knight back into the game, shielding the bishop from the rook, and putting this knight on a square. Notice this knight can never be chased away from that square by a pawn. Pawns are all elsewhere on the board. This my rook pawn is pretty safe from attack. His rook would have to get to the 7th rank to attack my rook pawn. So, and I'm a pawn up, so with even material. Otherwise, even piece distribution. So a good position for me, and probably winning with good play. Let's see. It's his turn here. He dropped his bishop back to g2, targeting my my e pawn. I kick his knight away. His knight comes into d6, and I play rook e6. Let's see, rook e7. This is what I mean about this game being a little punchy, or us being a little tired. Rook e7 was the move to play here to keep the best advantage for me. Rook e6, actually, the move I played, actually allows him to snag a pawn, and equalize the material. And I would still have the better position, but the thing is, he can now play knight c8. And there's just no good way to defend this pawn. And if I move that pawn, then the b pawn goes. A very typical kind of maneuver. Let's see, bishop to d7 is the move here. Knight takes, and rook to d6. I mean, I get my pieces to a good square, and I can play against his knight. So black still has an edge, but the material is now even, and white can play on with chances of a draw. So I shouldn't have allowed that. Let's back up. Now we're on move. We are on move 33, and so we are approaching the time control. So that may have been a factor in some of these inaccuracies. Anyway, I went rook e6, attacking his knight. He defended it, and I pushed on with the e3. I think this is a really nice move. I was happy to find this move. In fact, I was when I played rook e6, I was hoping to provoke his rook to this square so that I could play e3 with tempo. The point is, he's sort of forced to take. If he moves his rook, I'm still going to manage to disconnect his pawns here. If he moves his rook, I'll be able to take on f2 with check. So that will still leave him with uncoordinated pawns. And when he takes, which is what he played, then I trade bishops and grab the pawn. And I've just succeeded in creating another pawn weakness. So he's got 2 weak pawns as well as being a pawn down, and I'm pretty happy about this endgame. And but we still have 4 moves to go before the time control. Let's see, we're on move. This was move 36. Let's see, he played knight to c4. Hitting my rook, I drop it back. Plays king to f3. Go king to g7. We start marching our kings up. Plays e3. I go f5. He goes rook d6, activating his rook. And I go rook e6. And that's move 40, and we've made the time control. Although right here, instead of rook e6, it probably would have been better to play rook e4 and keep his king out. I was worried about his... well, I was worried that my king would get trapped back here by his rook. So my plan was to kind of inch forward with my king. Notice that he can't give me a check right away, and my king can then try and inch forward to this square. So just still keeping an edge for black here, but not the most accurate move. Let's see. He went rook d8. Well, the chess engine says actually trading at this point and going for the knight endgame is his best chance. But knight endgames are, well, they're tricky, so you might play it for that reason. But in general, this is a winning king and pawn endgame, and knight endgames are the ones that are closest to king and pawn endgame. So in general, you usually want to keep the rooks on in a position like this. Let's see, I went b5 to harass his knight. He went rook to c8, attacking my knight. And I went knight to e4. So I'm not giving every little mistake in this part. We're just going through the moves. But there were better moves in most of these cases. Let's see, he went rook c7 check. Went king f6. And he went knight to a5. So I think what was happening was, even though we made the time control, we were still probably moving a little too fast. So if you want to go over those moves with your own chess engine, you can find some more mistakes in there. Here's a mistake that I wanted to point out that I probably should have done better. I mean, it's one of these things where you plan these moves in advance. I figured after his knight moved, I was going to play the move a6 just to shore this up. So it's part of my long-term plan. But rook to a6 is just a better move. It's defending the a pawn, attacking his knight, and driving it back. And when the knight moves, I can grab the a pawn here. Chess engine gives this kind of sequence: check to force a trade, and then a6, and it likes this king and pawn endgame for black. So this seems to be a good king and pawn, or king and knight endgame, knight and pawn endgame. I forget what you call it. Okay, so anyway, I just went a6, I went king f4, went knight f2. Here's a tactic. So I saw this tactic after I played knight f2, but there's a better move here. And this is kind of a nice one. Tactic that I just missed at this point. So yeah, take a moment and see if you can spot the tactic, and pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm giving the answer away now. So the move knight to d2 threatens to checkmate that king, and he doesn't have any good answer here. I think, what was it? The chess engine said he could play something like knight to c6 to pin my knight, to pin my rook. I mean, he could play something like rook to c6 to pin my rook. So, but anyway, there's this threat of rook here, checkmate, and that's pretty severe, and I get an advantage out of this. But so anyway, that was something I noticed after I'd played this move, because I was trying to at some point I was trying to maneuver my knight around to this square and set up some kind of thing, but I had the opportunity right there. Let's see, knight f2. He went knight to b3. Maybe bringing his knight around to this square, hit my rook and the pawn. And I went knight to g4. And this seems to also be a mistake. Let's see, what could he play here? He could play, or what could I play? Rook e4 check, driving his king back is the way the engine wants to play it. And then playing knight g4. We actually get to this position in the game, and this is pretty good. You know, he can harass my king a little bit, but I can take this with check, and I will have a good position over here against his king. So that will be good for me. Let's see. I went knight g4 first, and he has one more chance to equalize things here. He could have played knight to c5, hitting my rook and putting pressure on this pawn. Probably rook takes e3 is my best try here. But then he can check, and I can't bring the rook back. Let's see. He drives my king back. His king can come forward. I eventually can unwind from this. Let's see. It's my turn. I have knight e5, which will defend this pawn, hit the rook, and later I'll have this move knight f2 to drive his king out of that square. So, but he's going to grab a pawn over here. I think I stay a pawn up in this line, but now my position has gotten considerably worse. So that would be best play for white. Let's see. I went knight g after I went knight g4. After I went knight g4, he just went rook to c3, rook to c3 rather, and now I go rook here check, and his king drops back. So we get a similar kind of position. I get knight e5 check in. His king keeps running, and this knight is in a good square, controlling this square. So at this point I have a win, and it's just a matter of not making any huge blunders. So and it is a long game. Let's see, we're up to move 49. And we're both tired, so the blunders are always a possibility. But I think I will step through some moves here because this is going to be a long video otherwise. I offer the rook trade once again, and this time he takes it. And I think this is now that my king and my knight are in better position. You know, his king has been driven back. This is a good time for me to go into a simpler endgame. So I just bring my king forward, and now my plan is just to march these pawns forward. So it's like there's several moves where he harasses me, and then I rearrange my pieces, and then I manage to move my pawns forward one step. And so we go through this kind of iteration for a while. I have to be careful. He's attacking on both sides with his knight. His knight is, you know, when it's centrally posted like that, it can go in either direction. So I have to make sure. And there I got another pawn move in. And just slowly marching forward. It's one of those rules of the endgame is that you need to really take your time and not be in a hurry. So step by step, there's another step forward, and now I have a passed pawn. And of course, if he sacks the knight, then I'll be able to win. You also have to make sure there's no tricks, such as white sacrificing the knight and managing to remove the last pawns from the board, because you need to have those pawns to win. But I have enough pawns over here on the king side that he can't really do that at this point. And now I start bringing my king to. Oh yeah, that was a nice maneuver here. Let's see. I bring my knight here. It attacks his pawn, and it also threatens to promote my pawn, push that pawn forward. So he brings his knight around to defend, and that gave me a chance to snag another pawn. So increasing my margin of victory. He was trying to, I shouldn't say bring it around to defend. He was trying to gang up on this pawn, but I can get my knight back in time to drive his king back. And now I start bringing my king forward to queen that pawn, and I get all the way to the A1 square. So I just have to be, yeah. I think it's just a win here, and unless I make some blunder here, I push it forward once again. He brings his king over to try and defend, and I play the move knight to D6. So at the moment, I can't push this pawn. And he will take it. But it's one of those situations where you should think about the Zugzwang, using the Zugzwang to get your objective. And that's what I was trying to do here with knight to d6. He can't actually move those pieces to attack the pawn. So this knight is free to maneuver. Now there's a more direct way of playing. I could have played someone else. There was actually spectators around the game at this point because it was one of the longest running games in the section, so other players had finished their games, and it was the top board, so other players were wandering by to look at the position, look at what was happening on board one. And so one of the players asked me afterwards why I didn't just play knight a3 check, and this wins too. Let's see, he could go king b3 to attack it. I can queen, he can take, and then I can take with the knight. I guess that was what I was kind of missing. I was thinking I take with the king and he takes with the king, and it wasn't all that clear, although I think that's still a win. But that would require some calculation. I had to make sure I got over to the pawns in time. Instead, I played the move knight to d6. So just drop my knight back to reposition it to another square. And he could play the knight. He can move the knight back and forth, like he can go to there, or he can move the king. What did he play in this position? He played king to d3. Yeah, so, and I played the move knight to e4, and he resigned because now the knight is not coming back to this square, and I'm just going to trade it off in queen. So there is no defense at this point. Let's see. He could have played, instead of king d3, could have played knight to b1 here. That's kind of the only move he can make that keeps this square under control. But I can still go knight e4, and all he can do is kind of shuffle his knight around. Well, it could have gone to a3 as well as c3. So actually, can't go to that square because I would take it. He can go to this square. But then I can start taking pawns over here. So I've got him completely tied down, and I'll be able to queen with this pawn, and that will win as well. So anyway, a couple different ways to win the game, but in the game he went king c2 here. I went knight d6. He went king d3. I went knight e4, attacking his knight in a position where he can no longer stop me from queening. And so he resigned. Anyway, a tough, hard-fought game, maybe a little scrappier than some of my other wins, but, well, it's probably pretty typical, and especially considering the circumstances of a long game and a long tournament. So at this point, since I defeated him, that boosted me up to 4.5 points out of 5. And the other player who was at 3.5 points did not win his game. And my opponent here, who was at 4 points, stays at 4 points because he lost. So I am in sole possession of first place at 4.5 points out of 5 going into the final round. So I'll be back with coverage of my final round soon. See you then.